Have you ever seen an HOA president sobbing in the middle of a charred lawn? I have. It was the moment she realized that the tool shed she labeled a threat to community aesthetics was actually the reason her entire neighborhood had lights for the past 10 years, and it all started because of a fence 3 inches too tall. My name is Anderson. I used to design nuclear reactors for the Navy, but the most exciting story of my life began when the HOA tried to tear down the mini reactor I built beneath my own property because it disrupted the visual harmony. What they didn't know was that I was the reason they hadn't experienced a single blackout in a decade. But after one drone, one explosion, and one flick of a switch sweet as cotton candy, they knew. Oh, they knew. That night, the sky tore open. Light surged from beneath the hill, brighter than the new LED street lamps the HOA had just approved with a $60,000 budget to enhance community aesthetics. Then came the blast, like a bunker buster, rattling window panes across the subdivision. I stood there, in old fuzzy slippers, coffee mug in hand, eyes unblinking. In front of me, flames reached higher than the HOA's new antenna tower, right where the heart of the neighborhood had once quietly pulsed. Not the clubhouse, not the playground, something far more secret. Through the smoke, I saw her. Martha Covington, HOA president, armed with a master's in community management and an attitude that screamed, "I know the law better than your lawyer." She was on her knees in the scorched grass, clutching a now incinerated folder of compliance violations, eyes lifted to the ashes as if expecting a miracle. "Don't bother, Martha. This isn't Disney. This is reality. And you just destroyed something you never understood." The police arrived. Fire trucks were delayed. HOA had prohibited left turns at the main gate during peak hours for traffic order. Neighbors crowded in, phones up, live streaming, shouting over each other. What the hell happened? And me? I took a sip of coffee, locked eyes with Martha, and said as gently as a breeze, "You just cut your own power, Martha." Sounds crazy, I know. But this story didn't start with an explosion. It started with a fence. Yes, a fence. 6 feet tall. No spikes, no red paint, no barbed wire, just a standard fence around a small tool shed at the base of my hill. But to the HOA, especially one run by Martha, nothing is small if they don't control it. "Mr. Anderson," she had scolded, clipboard in hand, "your fence exceeds height limits per Clause 14B in the Community Handbook. It disrupts the neighborhood's visual balance." Visual balance, my ass. What really burned them up wasn't the fence. It was not knowing what was behind it. And if you knew Martha, you'd know. Nothing drives her crazier than the existence of something. Secret she can't oversee. So they did the dumbest thing possible. They issued a removal order. And me? I laughed. Because that fence didn't guard a lawnmower. It protected the very thing that kept this entire neighborhood glowing for over a decade. And tonight, they kicked the hive. And this hive stings back. They say ignorance is bliss. But when you weaponize ignorance with a clipboard and a fake sense of authority, you get the HOA. It started with a letter. No knock, no conversation, just a printed notice taped to my front gate like some kind of eviction, warning from people who didn't even own the land they were trying to control. "Dear Mr. Anderson, your fence exceeds HOA visual standards and violates Section 14B of the Tallow Creek Design Guide. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in formal demolition by board action." Demolition of my fence. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that fence surrounded the single most important piece of infrastructure in the entire subdivision. Not just my property, the entire neighborhood. See, 15 years ago, I bought this land for one reason: space. I wasn't looking for scenic views or some tax haven. I needed distance, 10 acres minimum, dense tree line, stable water table, and a permitting office that barely worked past Wednesday. I didn't want a community. I didn't want neighbors. I wanted freedom. Freedom to build something no one else would dare attempt. Something compact, efficient, and so far ahead of its time it terrified bureaucrats. A micronuclear reactor. Legal. Contained. Self-regulating. Designed for off-grid independence and catastrophic resilience. I didn't just study the schematics, I wrote part of the damn manual. After 20 years designing naval reactors and a short, unofficial stint with a defense contractor I legally can't name, I walked away with 3 patents and enough classified know-how to power a small country, or in this case, a HOA development filled with Teslas and smug lawn signs. I broke ground myself. No contractors, no press, no grand opening, just me, a backhoe, and a blueprint. The control vault went in first, 10 feet underground lined with 3 feet of leaded concrete. Then came the cooling system, the intake wells, and a disguised dispersal stack that read, Weather Monitoring Station on the zoning documents. Above ground? Just a steel shed with a fake weather vane and a keypad hidden behind an old grill cover. To any casual observer, or HOA board member with a drone and an attitude, it looked like a tool shed. Maybe a man cave. Definitely not a nuclear-grade energy. Node built to handle suburban demand with triple redundant shielding and off-grid capacity. And you know what? For over a decade, it worked perfectly. No one asked questions. No one bothered me. The only mail I got was from the county tax office or junk catalogs trying to sell me stuff I invented back in '08. I even set up a discreet contract, anonymous of course, feeding excess power back into the municipal grid. Just a small contribution labeled Node 17 red, no name, no address, no red flags, but that was all before Martha got elected president of the HOA and her first executive priority. Aesthetic compliance. Translation. Rip down anything. That doesn't match her Pinterest board. So when her little committee saw the fence on satellite view and realized it wasn't HOA-approved cedar lattice with a beveled top, they assumed the worst. They assumed it was ugly. They assumed it was non-compliant. But what they never assumed, what they couldn't even fathom, was that it was the only thing keeping their perfect little cul-de-sac humming along with clean, uninterrupted power. They just had to poke the hornet's nest. And when they filed the demolition order, I let them, because sometimes the only way to teach a lesson is to let someone flip the wrong switch. People like to assume the worst, that anyone living on 10 acres with no HOA membership and a fence taller than regulation must be hiding something illegal, or at least eccentric. They're half right. I wasn't hiding something. I was hiding everything. I didn't move out here to escape the world. I moved out here to outbuild it, to outlast it. Back in the early 2000s, I was working deep inside a classified naval program. My job, to design nuclear power systems that could run silent, run cold, and never fail, even when the rest of the world did. I spent more time with radiation shielding diagrams than I did with people. And frankly, I preferred it that way. But one thing became crystal clear after 2 decades in the defense sector. The grid is fragile. We tell ourselves it's robust, redundant, protected. But pull back the curtain, and it's duct tape on a leaky dam. It's patchwork policies, outdated transformers, and bureaucrats with zero technical knowledge making decisions about national infrastructure because they took a 3-hour seminar. And I got tired of patching it, of pretending the duct tape would hold. So I walked away, cashed out my stock options, took my patents and left. But I didn't retire. I built it. I scoured the country for the right piece of land. Had to be just remote enough, just forested enough, and just forgotten enough. I needed zoning laws that were laughable, inspectors who couldn't spell radiation, and neighbors who cared more about deer season than neighborhood watch meetings. I found it in northern Wyoming. The listing said, "Quiet acreage with creek access and potential for farming." I read, "Natural water table, room for an underground vault, no HOA. Sold." I bought it in cash, set up my own P.O. box under a shell trust. Every detail, every screw, every circuit was planned, precise, and private. I designed the entire reactor to be self-regulating, cooled by passive airflow and triple fail-safe loops. Think of it like a giant nuclear thermos. No meltdown risk, no moving parts that could seize up, no emissions, no noise. It was beautiful. I buried the control vault 10 feet down, wrapped it in 3 feet of leaded concrete. Above it, I built what looked like a tool shed, plain metal siding, a keypad hidden behind a barbecue grill lid, and a weather vane on top for good measure. No logos, no satellite dishes, just a man, a shed, and a secret. At first, it powered just my home. And that was the goal: independence, energy security. Not having to rely on the same flimsy lines that failed every time a squirrel sneezed on. A transformer, but the system produced too much. I had more capacity than I could use. And I hate waste. So I dug into state energy law. Buried deep in the fine print, I found something brilliant: a loophole. If you supply electricity anonymously through a registered third-party brokerage, you can inject it into the municipal grid under a blind node ID. No name, no contract tied to your home, just raw, clean, untraceable energy. So I did. Node. 17 Red was born, and wouldn't you know it, that extra power ended up supplying a brand new subdivision built half a mile west, Tallow Creek Estates. Yeah, that Tallow Creek, with its solar-powered HOA billboards, its nightly LED light displays, its weekly green living workshops are hosted by people who couldn't change a light bulb without watching a YouTube tutorial. They had no idea they were riding on nuclear-generated current. My current dot for 10. Years, everything worked like a charm. No one noticed the underground shielded cable running from my generator to the feed junction. No one questioned the node. No one sent inspectors. The system was invisible, seamless, perfect, until they arrived. The new wave of urban refugees, as they call themselves, fleeing big cities in search of fresh air and tight control, people who wanted the country feel, with all the micromanagement of a gated community. People who thought HOA stood for homeowners overall. And at the head of it all, Martha Covington, HOA president, self-declared energy expert, and woman who once mistook a pressure regulator for a birdhouse. The moment she found out about the unregistered structure on the edge of my land, her crusade began. Not because she knew what it was, but because she didn't. And that's the scariest kind of HOA leader, the one who fears what she can't categorize. So she pushed for action: a demolition order, a community vote, solar panels to replace whatever I had. She even claimed I was violating sustainable equity standards. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I waited, because when people who live on borrowed power decide to bite the hand that feeds them, sometimes the only thing left to do is turn the lights off. They say the best place to hide something is right in front of people's faces. I say, that only works if no one around you knows what they're looking at. So when I set out to build a functioning nuclear reactor 50 yards from my garage, I didn't bury it behind fences, motion detectors, or a mountain of NDAs. No. I built it like a ghost builds a house, in silence, in layers, and right under the noses of the clueless. First came the excavation. I spent 2 full summers digging and pouring alone. Just me, a rented backhoe, and a playlist of Johnny Cash and reactor calibration tutorials. 10 feet down, I poured the vault, walls made of leaded concrete, 3 feet thick, tested for gamma and neutron attenuation. I didn't sleep well until the shielding numbers read 0. Next, the inner chamber. A compact core housing, precast, rated for seismic and thermal events. I designed it to use triso fuel, ultra-safe, triple-encapsulated particles that couldn't melt down even if you begged them to. It's what they use in space missions. You could drive a truck into this thing and it'd barely flinch. Then came the coolant loop, dual-flow, passive convection, with a triple failsafe override. No pumps to seize, no valves to fail. Just the beautiful simplicity of physics doing what it does best: move heat, release energy, and keep balance. Above that, I built the intake well, shielded and pressure-regulated to bring in clean air and water, filtered with redundancy so tight you could drink from it after a meltdown. And just to be sure, I installed a chemical scrubbing chamber, because if something did go sideways, it wouldn't be my fault when the flowers started glowing. Now, here's the real trick: the disguise. See, Martha and her HOA minions are obsessed with appearances. Everything in Tallow Creek has to be visually harmonious. No bold colors, no non-native shrubs, no unregistered wind chimes. Which meant if I wanted them to ignore my reactor, I had to make it so boring, so visually forgettable, they'd scroll right past it. So I built a tool shed. No, really. Corrugated steel siding, a rusty lock, a weather vane on the roof. I even left a broken rake leaning against the side for that hasn't been touched in years aesthetic. The keypad to access the underground vault, hidden behind the panel of an old barbecue grill. Cover! You'd have to want to find it, and nobody around here has that kind of curiosity. They're more worried about whether your mulch is HOA-approved cedar chips or not. The dispersal stack, my greatest sleight of hand, was hidden as a weather monitoring station. I filed the zoning paperwork under a bogus research nonprofit I created in 2009, Rural Climate Observation and Emergency Readiness Network. Slapped a sticker on the side. Nobody questioned it. The whole system? Silent, shielded, self-contained. My house, about 200 feet uphill, drew power through a triple-insulated underground conduit. Not a flicker, not a surge, just clean, constant energy. You know what it cost me in monthly utilities? 0. And the best part? I didn't waste a single watt. I built a feedback loop that pushed surplus electricity into the municipal grid. Not illegally. Hell, I found every loophole and clause to make it legit. I filed through a third-party microproducer aggregator, got a blind contract. My power was registered under Node 17 Red. No name, no trace. Just a silent, glowing heart beneath the hills feeding a town that didn't even know where its lifeline came from. For 10 years, nobody noticed. No inspectors. No nosy neighbors. No HOA clowns with tape measures and fake smiles. Until the new wave moved in. Until they showed up with their fanny packs, solar slogans, and plastic lawn flamingos, and started trying to clean up the neighborhood. Until someone flew a drone over my land and saw the one thing I never accounted for. The fence. Yeah. The damn fence. 6 feet tall. Reinforced wood. Blended into the landscape, but not HOA approved. And that was all they needed. All the excuses they wanted. They didn't know what it protected. They didn't know what was beneath. They just knew it didn't have a proper permit, and that was enough. So Martha filed her motion, called it a community hazard, lobbied to have it torn down and replaced with shared-use green space, and me? I could have stopped her. I had every document, every permit, every sealed approval from agencies they didn't even know existed, but I didn't use them because I knew what they'd do. I knew they'd push too far. I knew they'd try to destroy what they didn't understand. And when they did, when that drone flew too low, too close, and hit the upper dispersal sensor, boom, the cue. Lights went out, the alarms went off, and suddenly the neighborhood full of smug, clipboard-waving zealots realized the truth. I didn't just power my house. I powered them all. When the lights went out in Tallow Creek, it wasn't gradual. No flicker, no warning, just dark. Streetlights, gone. Garage doors frozen mid-lift, sprinkler systems sputtering to a stop. Every smart home, every porch camera, every overpriced thermostat, screaming for connection like a toddler dropped in the woods. The HOA emergency line, dead. The clubhouse Wi-Fi, toast. And those fancy little solar backup units they'd bragged about at the last community meeting? Yeah, turns out they only power a fridge light and one ceiling fan for maybe 15 minutes. I watched it unfold from my porch, sipping coffee like it was a 4th of July show. One by one, the houses blinked into blackness. It wasn't just ironic, it was poetic. These people spent years preaching green energy without understanding the grid they lived on. They thought their homes were powered by virtue, by good intentions and wind chimes. What they actually ran on was me. Node 17 Red. Let me explain. 10 years ago, when I finished the reactor, I could have stopped at self-sufficiency. I could have cut my line off at the breaker, and lived in my own little off-grid kingdom, flipping off every utility bill in the process. But the reactor was producing too much. It was designed for redundancy, for wartime naval demand, not one cranky ex-engineer and his freezer full of venison. So I built a feedback loop. State energy policy allows independent microproducers to contribute power to the grid under anonymous brokerage contracts. You don't need to list a name, just a certified source, stable output, and a secure injection point. I had all three, so I hired a third-party aggregator, some firm in New Mexico that didn't ask questions and didn't answer phones. Filed under the alias Red Ridge Systems. I became a ghost in their database. My contribution went in as Node 17 Red, a blind data point in a grid of hundreds, untraceable, unbranded, but very, very real. And guess where most of that power went? Tallow Creek Estates, Phase 3. The very development that Martha Covington now ruled with an iron wineglass. Their houses, their clubhouse, their HOA server room, all of it ran on my reactor. And nobody knew. Not the HOA, not the county, not even the power company. They thought it was just grid energy. Plug and play, flip a switch, and poof, light. They never questioned the source because they were too busy measuring grass height and arguing over mailbox colors. But here's the kicker. Once they launched that drone and triggered the proximity failsafe, the system shut itself off, total lockdown, feed loop terminated, vault sealed, control override locked out for 48 hours to prevent tampering. I built it that way on purpose, for exactly this kind of scenario, unauthorized interference by unqualified idiots, which is exactly what HOA officers are, by design. They wanted to tear down a fence. Instead, they tore down their own infrastructure. And now? Well, let's just say the fallout was immediate and delicious. Martha was the first to call. Her number lit up my burner phone before the smoke had even cleared from the dispersal stack. "Mr. Anderson," she hissed. "What did you do?" I let her scream. Let her stumble through half-baked accusations about sabotage, terrorism, environmental violations. At one point, she accused me of running a Russian satellite relay station, whatever the hell that means. Then I answered, calm as a mountain stream. I stopped supplying free power to people who spit on my land. Dead silence on the line. "You mean, you were the source?" I could hear the panic ripple through her voice. Because at that moment, everything fell into place. Why were their electric bills so low? Why Phase 3 never lost power during last year's transformer fire? Why the power consultant she brought in couldn't explain the draw readings from their meters? It had always been me. And now I was done. "You'll be hearing from the board," she snapped. I chuckled. "You'll need power for that. Good luck." Then I hung up. The next 24 hours were glorious. HOA board members knocking on my door with gift baskets and excuses. Karen types from the HOA patrol waddling up the hill in Skechers, trying to act friendly like we were suddenly neighbors again. One guy even offered to mediate. Said he'd help me draft a new contract with the HOA if I turned the grid back on. I told him I'd rather power my chicken coop than their clubhouse, which, by the way, is exactly what I did. Redirected the feed loop. Rewired the grid so that the surplus now runs to my greenhouse, my workshop, my entire east pasture. I lit up my land like a Christmas tree in the middle of their blackout. And when night fell, oh, I made damn sure they saw it. 2 days after the blackout, they escalated, not with apologies, not with accountability, no, with inspectors, the kind that show up in khakis and clipboards, pretending their job is about safety, when really they're just hired hounds sniffing for fines. I knew the type. I'd written federal compliance checklists these guys still carried around like holy scripture. They came in a white county van parked just outside my property line like cowards who'd seen too many movies. 4 of them stepped out, one wearing aviators like a cop, another squinting at a topo map, and 2 interns fresh out of college, trying hard not to look intimidated. One held a badge, the others held tablets. All of them had that smug, gotcha look, like they were about to bust open some illegal grow-op, or catch a tax evader watering his lawn during a drought restriction. I walked down my driveway slowly, boots crunching. On gravel, arms crossed, not saying a word. The leader, aviators, tried to speak first. "Mr. Anderson, we've received reports of an unlicensed energy structure on your property. We're here to conduct an inspection under emergency municipal authority." I let that hang in the air. Then I smiled, just a little. "You bring a Geiger counter, son?" He blinked. "Excuse me? Because if you're here to inspect a nuclear facility, that better be the first thing out of your bag. Unless you're hoping your clipboard's lead-lined." The interns looked nervous. One took a step back. Aviators shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing this wasn't your typical breaker box violation. I pulled out a laminated binder from under my arm, an old relic, weathered and thick. I dropped it on the hood of their van with a thud that made all four of them flinch. "That's the safety protocol I wrote for the U.S. Naval Microreactor program. Paragraph 12 explains how not to approach a live system without prior coordination. Paragraph 14 outlines exactly what happens when someone without clearance trips an external failsafe." I leaned in close. Spoiler alert. You're lucky all you lost was power. Aviators tried to regain composure. "Sir, regardless of your background, this structure has not been formally declared or permitted under civilian jurisdiction. There are serious zoning concerns." I cut him off. "Zoning? You're standing on land zoned agricultural mixed rural use, which by county charter means I can raise goats, grow tobacco, and install any power source short of a military-grade reactor." I paused. "Which this one technically isn't, because I built it myself." He didn't have a comeback, so he tried a different angle. "Be that as it may, the structure appears to be providing commercial-scale energy to the municipal grid, which places it under regulatory purview." I pulled out the second binder, filed contracts, legal loopholes, state energy aggregation laws with the relevant paragraphs highlighted in surgical yellow. Node 17 Red was approved through a third-party broker under the Independent Microgeneration Act of 2010, which your department signed. Off on, twice. I tapped the signature page with his own supervisor's name on it. The interns looked like they wanted to disappear. Aviators took a step back. He glanced at the weather vane, still spinning lazily atop the tool shed, then back at me. "Why go through all this trouble, Mr. Anderson?" That's when I dropped the smile. Because I wanted one place on Earth where I didn't have to ask permission, not from the government, not from a board of retirees, not from people like Martha Covington, who think power means telling other people how high their grass can grow. I built something clean, safe, and stable, and I shared it, silently, for a decade. And the moment someone saw something they didn't understand, they tried to destroy it. I stepped closer, so if you want to call it in, go ahead. Just know the only reason your van didn't melt down when you pulled up is because I designed it that way. Silence. He stared at me, then down at the binder, then at the interns, both of whom had begun subtly retreating toward the van. Eventually, he nodded once. "We'll follow up." "You do that." They left without stepping foot past the property line, and that was the end of the inspection. No citations, no warrants, no forced shutdown. Because here's the thing about bureaucrats and clipboard warriors. They're not used to dealing with someone who knows the rules better than they do, because he wrote them. If there's one thing HOA boards are good at, aside from wasting money on potted plants and printed newsletters, it's denial. And Martha Covington? She practically had a PhD in it. 3 days after the blackout, after the inspectors tucked tail and left, after the HOA emergency fund was spent on nothing but bottled water and overtime fees for an electrician who couldn't find the source of the outage, they held a meeting. In the dark. I'm not joking. I watched the whole thing, from my upstairs window, binoculars in one hand, a whiskey glass in the other. The clubhouse was lit by candles and battery-powered lanterns, Martha standing at the podium in a windbreaker like she was commanding FEMA. "Neighbors, we will overcome this coordinated attack on our infrastructure." Attack? Lady, the only thing that got attacked was your pride. She went on for 15 minutes about resilience, sustainable alternatives. and some nonsense about forming a HOA energy subcommittee. Her solution? Rebuild. They were going to install solar panels across all community rooftops, erect a pair of miniature wind turbines on the common green, and retrofit the clubhouse with Tesla power walls, funded by a special assessment from every homeowner. That's right. They blew up my reactor, lost the power that ran their lives, and their brilliant recovery plan was charging people more money for Pinterest energy ideas. I could have laughed. I did laugh. But I didn't interfere, not once, because I knew what was coming. See, this wasn't California. This was northern Wyoming, where winters hit like a freight train and sunlight disappears by 4 p.m. on a good day. Where wind turbines don't generate power, they get iced over and freeze in place like popsicles on a stick. But the HOA didn't bother checking specs, didn't hire anyone with a real engineering background. They picked contractors based on who promised eco-conscious aesthetics and could deliver before the next HOA election cycle. So they poured $120,000 into their green dream. Panels installed, turbines mounted, batteries lined up like Lego bricks in the clubhouse basement, and when they flipped the switch, nothing. Well, not nothing. They got 6 hours of emergency power, half the lights in the clubhouse flickering like they were auditioning for a haunted house attraction. The turbines froze during the first snow. The solar array barely charged enough to power a microwave. And the power walls? They drained so fast trying to support the community irrigation system that they triggered a fault cascade. Again. The whole neighborhood went back into blackout within a week. I didn't gloat. Didn't even speak. I just made sure my greenhouse was lit up like Times Square. Let them look up the hill at night and see what competence actually looks like. Then came the real kicker. Martha tried to apply for state aid, arguing the HOA was victim to a hostile energy monopoly. She claimed I had withheld critical infrastructure from the community. But guess what? They'd never paid me a cent. No contracts, no agreements, no acknowledgement of the source. They'd been leeching off Node 17 Red for a decade, and the moment I cut them off, suddenly I was a monopoly? Even the state energy board laughed her out of the office. One rep reportedly said, "Lady, you unplugged yourself. Now you want a bailout?" So the HOA did what HOAs always do in the face of reality. They turned inward, started blaming each other. 3 board members resigned within a week. The treasurer skipped town. The new interim president? Some poor guy named Harold who just wanted to host pickleball tournaments, now stuck trying to explain why the community website went offline and the electric gate won't open. Meanwhile, my lights stayed on. My reactor hummed quietly beneath the shed, and every time a resident walked their dog past my fence line, they'd pause just a second longer, like they were finally starting to wonder what exactly was behind that weather vane. That morning, frost clung to my windshield like a warning. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the wind howled through Tallow Creek as if sweeping the road clear for a coming storm. The entire neighborhood was frozen. No hum of HVAC systems, no gurgling of sump pumps. Just rattling window panes and the occasional distant bark of a restless dog. I stood on my front porch, hot coffee in hand, looking down at the rows of homes that once gleamed with LED porch lights and eco-friendly living. Yard signs. Now it was all dark, lifeless, like a scene from a disaster movie. This was day 13 since I'd shut down Node 17 Red. I hadn't cut the power for revenge. That's not who I am. I cut it because they crossed a line you don't cross unless you're prepared for the consequences. They dismantled what they didn't understand and pointed fingers when everything collapsed, but I'm not cruel either. I once gave them light. And that morning, I decided I would again, on my terms. I walked into the control room, past the lead-lined door, placing my hand on a panel I knew better than my own breath. The green-hued startup screen blinked, Node 17 Red, status, isolated. I tapped through the diagnostics, safety protocols, radiation checks, coolant flow, pressure valves. Everything in the green, everything is ready. With a single touch, I could restore power to all of Tallow Creek, quietly, as I had the first time. But this time, I wanted them to know. I wanted them to understand that power doesn't just come from wires, it comes from the act of respecting the one who keeps the lights on. I sent an email. No pleasantries, no emotion. Just a few lines directed to the official HOA board address. Dear Tallow Creek Board, Node 17. Red can be reactivated under a clearly defined energy agreement. No more freebies, no anonymity, and absolutely no interference from any fence aesthetic subcommittees. If agreed, your lights return. If not, good luck with your frozen turbines. 1 hour later, I received a reply. Not from Martha, she'd resigned. Not from Harold, last I heard he was elbow deep in broken gate wiring. It was from a resident named Ellen Burke, the same woman who'd once stood up in a community meeting to call my project a hazardous vanity project. Her email was short. I don't know what you used to do, but my son needs a ventilator. If you can restore the power, I'm grateful. Nothing more. Ellen. I stared at the screen for a while, then I flipped the switch. The system hummed, like an old beast exhaling after a long slumber. Electricity surged through the buried conduits, branching into substations, flowing gently into homes one by one. Lights flickered on across the neighborhood, porch bulbs, stovetops, baseboard heaters, all waking from their cold, unwanted sleep. No one called, no one texted, but I knew they felt it. That night, as I stood on my porch, Ellen appeared. She brought no flowers, no pie, just a thick coat and eyes rimmed with fatigue. Thank you, she said. Not everyone could have done that, and no one should have treated you the way they did. I nodded. Didn't say a word. I didn't need an apology. Just for them to remember this, you don't have to understand everything. But if you see a light, don't be the person who snuffs it out just because you don't know where it came from. They say, light is a symbol of hope, but sometimes light is a warning that somewhere someone has been quietly making your world better and quietly being ignored. I powered Tallow Creek for 10 years. No one knew. No one thanked me until I turned it off. And when I turned it back on, not for the HOA, not for Martha, but for a mother asking for breath for her child, I stopped being the weirdo on the hill. I became the only person in this neighborhood who actually knew how to keep it running.